as she said, I'm the president of San Francisco PTA, and thank you for joining us tonight on this topic. And great to see so many familiar names, as well as a couple new names on this Wednesday, right before winter break. So the topic is PTA nominating committees and elections. And the reason that that is so important, I always like to just start off with reminding us all what the mission of PTA is. So the California PTA's mission is to positively impact the lives of all children and families. And so, thereby it goes to thinking that whoever you are choosing as your next year's leaders are going to help shape and form that mission and accomplishing that. And so that is what a nominating committee does. It helps to pick the future leaders. I'm going to go to the next slide, hopefully. I also want to let you know that it's the first time that I'm doing this different kind of screen share. So hopefully that goes well. That's another thing that I love about PTA is that there's a lot of opportunities for learning new skills. So I've been learning a lot more about Zoom technology. Okay, so what is a nominating committee? The purpose is to select candidates for next year's PTA leadership. And where can we learn more about what's involved in a nominating committee? Just like the place that you can go to answer a lot of your questions, it's the PTA, your PTA unit's bylaws. So in your bylaws, you'll find out how many people are supposed to be on this committee, what is the timeline for this committee, and what are their duties. You typically do want to, Michelle mentioned that the elections and the nominating committee can sneak up on you. And so in timing, so you want to check your bylaws. Most elections will either be March or April. And so you want to work backwards about at least 2 months before that. So that puts you in January or February to elect your nominating committee. And we'll go a little bit more into that once on the next slide. Nominating committees, it's a great committee to be involved in because it's a finite period of time. So when you start in January, your work is, when your work is going to be over. It's going to be over by the election in March or April. And it's the nominating committee's job ends when they give that final report of which officers they have decided to slate. For the election. So they don't actually conduct the election. The president conducts the election, but they do read the report. Okay, so again, you're going to start with your bylaws. So you're going to get together. Once your nominating committee is elected, it's going to be 3 or 5 people. It's usually an odd number. I usually recommend choosing 5 people for your nominating committee, but again, this will be stated in your bylaws. I like 5 over 3 people just because it helps you to share the workload and it helps you share that responsibility when you have 5 people to work with. But for some groups, that doesn't make any sense. A smaller group might have trouble getting the volunteers. 3 is just fine. You'll hear often it's the nominating committee members as well as alternates. Alternates are just a backup person should someone not be able to serve on the nominating committee. And so alternates don't actually get involved in the meetings. And that's usually having one backup or alternate person is very common. The nominating committee, again, so sometimes I'll refer to them as NomCom just for short if I happen to do that. The NomCom is responsible for just the elected officers. So in your bylaws, you'll have at least a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. You might also have a financial secretary or several vice presidents. It's that role of the NomCom to just pick those elected officers. And so appointments like parliamentarian or committee chairs, that's not the responsibility of the nominating committee to list out, but they might be talking to interested people and could make a recommendation to the president to appoint someone. But in general, you would just be responsible for doing your elected officers. Let's see, so looking at the timeline, we talked about it's a minimum of 2 months, but it's always great it's never too early to start thinking about who is going to fill in your spot for next year. So if you're a current president or current executive vice president, always thinking about, who you might be able to work with as a successor and help mentor them. You can start that, earlier than 2 months. And the nominating committee, if they're elected in December, that's great too. It gives them just a little bit more time. There are some requirements. So the nominating committee will need to present the slate or the list again of nominees for each office about 28 days before, and that can be via email or a meeting announcement during a meeting. And so then having 2 months before is why it gives them at least a month to kind of search and recruit. And I don't see any questions in the chat. If you do have any questions, Michelle will alert them to me if I'm not paying attention there. And we'll have time at the end for questions as well. And I know a lot of you are experienced PTA members, and so I'll invite you also to share some of your experiences with nominating committees. I think that can be very valuable as well. Okay. A little bit more about just the committee members themselves when you're choosing them. And again, those members themselves are elected. So qualifications that you want to look for, they do need to be a member, have been a member for 30 days, just like you need to in order to vote in the election. You'd have to have been a member for 30 days. The nominating committee, you never want to have anyone serving more than 1 consecutive year. So you might serve 1 year, you take a break, you could serve again. Another fact that some people don't know is the president never serves on this nominating committee. And so you can kind of see that they want to keep it varied and different and have different people involved in choosing the following year's leadership. And you also want to do your best. It can be tough at times, but to even in the nominating committee members themselves, to have them representative of your community. So if you're a K-5 school, try not to have all 5th grade family members on that committee, kind of spread it around. And you want to try to build a board and leadership that is reflective of your community at your school. The principal can be a member of your nominating committee, as can the parliamentarian, but they are not necessarily members. They actually need to be voted on. But the principal always does serve as an advisor. The parliamentarian, while they're not necessarily a nominating committee member, their role, one of their main duties is to call the nominating committee to its first meeting. And at that point is when they would give the instructions, make sure that you have copies of your bylaws, that you understand some of these qualifications of your officers and how the process works. There's what I was just mentioning. So at the first meeting of the nominating committee, you want to have your bylaws, because that's where you're going to know which offices you're looking to fill. It's a good idea to have your membership list, which would state when people joined your unit. You can find job descriptions either on CaliforniaPTA.org has some standard job descriptions. It's also a great idea for current officers to write up a little blurb about what role they play at their school and maybe how many hours they spend a week. Just do a small job description themselves. And so there's a checklist here, and we will give out the slide deck as well as, and so you'll have these links too, but Michelle might be able to put them in the chat. So there's lots of information besides just a video like this or being able to ask questions, or always reach out to Second District. CAPTA.org has tons of information about this topic. During that first meeting of your nominating committee, you will elect a chair, and that person can just help you keep on your timeline. And you will be reviewing which officers, which duties, and scheduling follow-up meetings. Oh, so I put this, little picture here. I survived another meeting that should have been an email. It is important that even in the Zoom world that you do meet together that first time, but the follow-up meetings, it might just be one more in email, really. It doesn't need to be that you meet in person. You could do it just by check-ins via email. Just to see where you're all at in the process. And so the committee's responsibilities, You're going to select one nominee for each voted position. There are 3 officers that are required each year. It's president, treasurer, and secretary. And so you might want to focus on those roles. The president-elect, once the president is voted after the election, that person is going to be making all the appointments that will be ratified by the board afterwards. One good thing to do is you want to be, as inclusive as possible. So you really want to get out the message, whether that's your listservs or some people use Parent Square, whatever methods that you use for communication to your families. You want to make sure that they understand that there's a process for this and that every PTA member is invited to be and have an opportunity to be a PTA officer the following year. One of the assignments that you might make at your first meeting is to speak with current officers. So you could just assign one person to go and speak to those current officers, get an idea if they would like to serve again. Of course, if it's their 2nd term in a row, they won't be able to serve a 3rd term in a row. The PTA bylaws will all state that you can only serve 2 consecutive. If you take a break, then you could come back to a 3rd role as president. So you can serve 2 years consecutively in the same role, and then you need to take a break and then move on, and then come back to it. I mean, let's see. If you look on capta.org again, there's even like scripts for interviews. Some people get really formal about it. Other people are very casual, but there is that type of information available to you. And again, the main goal is that you want to be able to present a slate 28 days before the election. You can do it a little bit earlier, but at least 28 days notice. If you don't have a full slate, so say you only found a president and a treasurer and you couldn't find a secretary or a vice president, that's okay. You can just go ahead and present the slate of nominees as you have it. If anyone should come up in between the time of presenting your list and the election, you can present a revised slate, and that's perfectly okay too. So sometimes we can't make it all happen. And here's an example. That link will lead you to an example of a report, just very simple, just a list of the names, and then everyone signs it. So a couple do's and don'ts. You do, of course, want to very carefully consider the qualifications of each nominee. You don't want to just be asking your own friends, and you don't want to be twisting someone's arm. You want to make sure that people are aware of the duties and the role that they'd be playing, a time commitment, the fun that it can be, the friends you can make. Let them know what it's really like. You do want to keep things confidential. Oftentimes you'll get information about people, why they should or shouldn't be a PTA board member, and so some things can come up, and it's you need to have a confidential process. And do accept an office if you are sincerely interested, but I know that I always appreciate if someone's has made a commitment, but they come to you and say, I just don't think I can do this. So you do want to be honest with yourself as well as them about how much time that you can commit. One thing it's making me think about is just another thing to let people know is that you can make these roles your own. A lot of times people see, oh my gosh, that president did so much work and had so much time and did all these things so well. I could never step in and do that. Everyone can have their own way of doing things and their own styles, and so don't ever be afraid to jump in there. You'll find that it's a very supportive atmosphere, and there's lots of support in whatever role you're in, even from the district PTA. We're here to help you. You're never alone. Okay, so once you get to the election, that is when, by the end of the election, that's when the role of the nominating committee does end. And at the election meeting, you can use the script that's there. So the president actually runs the election, and so the nominating committee just reads the report. You want to make sure that everyone voting in the election, just like when you're voting for any motion, that they have been a member for 30 days as well. That's why it's important to have that membership list. And you'll be able to click, I'm not going to do it right now, but there's a very clear checklist, makes it really easy, and literally a script that you can just read from. At the beginning of each election, the parliamentarian will be asked to read a section of the bylaws, and then the nominating committee will read the report, which is just the names of each person of all of the candidates that they found. And it's really important to ask for nominations from the floor. So that means that asking anyone in the room, is there anyone that would like to nominate themselves or someone else? And you need not be present in the room. So if Michelle is not at the meeting, I could still nominate her as long as she has agreed to be nominated. And that also just helps with inclusivity, even though the nominating committee has presented a slate and a list of names, there's still always an opportunity for anyone else to jump in. So then it becomes time to vote. Most cases, you will just use a voice vote. So in the times of Zoom, a voice vote could be everyone unmute and say aye, or it could mean use the reaction button and raise your hand or give a thumbs up. And if there's only one person for each role, then it's very easy. You just do a voice vote. If you have a case where the nominating committee has presented one name for a president, but someone else wants to put their name into the hat for calling for nominations from the floor, that's a case when you would want to have a ballot vote. And you want to just be prepared for that in case it happens. So it's a good idea to have paper ballots ready for any meeting, actually, because any motion someone could say, hey, I feel like this should be a private vote. And so you'd want to do that by ballot. And there are some recommendations on California PTA.org where it has some ideas for how you can do ballot voting when it's a virtual meeting, but we won't get too much into that right now, but there are tips for that. So after the election, the nominating committee's role is complete. And then you say, so what happens? So just when you're elected, you become an officer-elect. So you're the president-elect. You don't actually take office and become the official president until the start of your fiscal year, which is usually July 1st. But that said, as an officer-elect, you still have some responsibilities and you have an opportunity to still pull together meetings. You can discuss the budget for next year, start planning your calendar, all of these things. You can still start, it gives you time to do some overlap with the outgoing officers. And the reason that the latest that you ever want to have your election is the second week in April. And that just gives you that much more time to do planning before next year. And it also allows you to attend the California State PTA Convention, which usually happens in May. These were just some common questions that are asked. Can two volunteers share a position? So I do know that some of our units do still use co-officers. PTA does not have co-officers. It has to be one person is the true, for example, president. However, that's why we also have executive vice presidents. So that's essentially works as co-presidents, but one is the president and one is the executive vice president. Same thing for, say, a vice president of fundraising. If you wanted to have a shared position for that, rather than having co-fundraising chairs, the best thing to do is to have a supporting vice president of fundraising. And can one person be nominated for more than one office? Absolutely, they can. However, we can only serve out one office at a time. And I think a lot of activity has been happening in the chat. I just wanted to open this up to were there any specific questions?
Yeah, Melissa, there was one question that Wyman, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, posted that I thought would probably be worth talking about as a group. And they said, historically, our school, a K-5, has had a very small numbers of parents volunteering for PTA offices. And there were some years when we had no parent wanting to become an officer until some convincing, to a year when just one parent wanted to volunteer. So if we have just one parent wanting to become a board officer in each of the 3 core officers, is that going to be an issue? So I think that capacity question and, availability of folks and trying to recruit is an issue in lots of schools. So maybe we could talk about that. And then there's another question related, maybe you can answer. Lori's asking, by one office, does that include committee chairs or just officers in the bylaws?
So if you can't, if you have, say, a treasurer and that person also wants to be the chair of community engagement, is that the question? Yeah, only one person in each board role, and that comes down to there's only one person has a vote. So that person couldn't be serving as both the treasurer and the chair and have 2 votes. It just needs to be separate people. Does that answer?
Said, I would just add that we all know that many of us wear many hats in PTA. And so if there's some essential work that has to get done, people just divide the essential work. They may not have another title, but for instance, one of the questions I was wondering, Melissa, if you could cover is, what if you don't have a parliamentarian at your school? How do you go through this process?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an example of there's an essential function of launching the nominating committee. And what if you don't have a parliamentarian? Who does that? And that's an example of how sometimes we have to kind of fill some different functions, even if those officer positions don't exist. And so that's, I think, one way we get the most important stuff done, even if we don't have the officer. If we would have 20 people who are interested in being on a board, have individual roles, how do we deal with that?
Most definitely. People are wearing multiple hats. And so they may be sharing more than one person's role or doing several roles at a time. I guess the part that is just the rules oriented part is just that's still one person still only has 1 vote. They don't get 2, but certainly the shared role. A lot of groups don't have an official parliamentarian. So in terms of you can always appoint a parliamentarian for a meeting. Another board member or another PTA member can help you with the role of the parliamentarian during a meeting, which might be timekeeping or just there to consult and on questions about bylaws, for example. But if you don't have a parliamentarian for this nominating committee process, your board can do the shared work. It's shared work again, and to pull together, see who is interested in serving on the nominating committee, and then that list of names will be brought to the membership to vote on. So that's the question. If you don't have a parliamentarian, you can still move forward on this. And then about Wayman's question was more about just the capacity, and that's been it's a long-standing issue, but has been definitely come harder during the pandemic to find involvement. Some things that people don't forget that and you don't want to overwork them, but sometimes teachers and staff do take on other roles besides parents, but we would never want to see, only teachers or staff running your PTA. Really want to see a partnership in that with people from both groups, both stakeholders. See, what are some other ideas about how have people helped to when you're just really struggling to fill at least your basic 3 roles? What have other people done?
I wanted to
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I wanted to comment on Women's question. What we found when at least 2 years ago, we were struggling to find a treasurer. And so we were able to thankfully find a parent, but he was also an incoming kindergarten, never been part of the school community. So what we found though was that even though they were new and they were willing, they still needed a lot of support. So like, we're really scrounging for volunteers, but we do have to make sure that they have the support on the back end in some ways for training. And because I think they're so, especially if they're coming in new and they're excited, but they don't really know what's going on with the school community as well. So there's just a lot of gaps, I think. Like ideally, we would like someone who's been there for at least 2 or 3 years so that they at least know kind of a flow of the school. But if it's enthusiastic kindergarten parents, I do think that previous officers could definitely help with some of the responsibilities of training and keeping people up to date. Because we did struggle a little bit with our new officers in the beginning.
Yeah,
But
that's I like the point that you make about just having officers that come in that really understand your school's culture. That can be important for the nominating committee to take into consideration about when they're looking for nominees to slate. But of course, you also want to invite those new people, like you're saying. Don't rule that out. That's why leaving a blank space in your slate or a space to fill for a new parent that's coming in, maybe even mid-year, or like a new kindergarten parent, that's still a great thing to do. So it doesn't need to be 100% of people understanding the way PTA works and the school culture. It's great to have that mix of new ideas, plus people that are very comfortable with all of the sort of business aspects of running the PTA. And of course, just a reminder that, you don't need to have all this list of skills coming in, because there are lots of training opportunities from district PTA, from California PTA, like you said. So thank you.
Melissa, I don't know if you see, there's an exchange here in the chat where Catherine was asking, if the treasurer can also be the VP. And then Lori was talking about how she came in as communications chair, but then was appointed to be president. She's kept on the tasks of communications, but she only gets 1 vote. But I think one of the important parts of their question, of the points here, was how does that work with quorum? If you have, just generally, when you think about quorum with the number of people who are elected and how that's, the connection between bylaws and number of people who are actually filling those offices, is that something you want to talk about too?
Yeah, the quorum is the minimum number of people that you need to have present at a meeting in order to take action. So in order to make a vote, for example, and the quorum is usually smaller for a board meeting than it is for a membership meeting. And that's something you might want to take a look at in your bylaws. And especially if you're updating your bylaws, I would recommend making it the lowest possible number. Some people have it a higher number, maybe they didn't realize it could be lower, or they had it higher for some reason. But that's something we can look at together when you're updating bylaws. One thing that affects your quorum is the number of officers you have. So maybe you don't really need a financial officer, not the treasurer, but financial secretary. So you might be able to remove that officer, and that might lower your quorum. So there's things like that we can look at. Is there anyone that has already approved or voted in their nominating committee? I know there's at least one school here because I am a parent at that school. But are there any others? No. Yeah. So at Marina PTSA, they used their December, or was it November? December. It must have been, or like the first week in December, or was it the third week in November? Whatever it was, they've already elected their nominating committee. It sounds very early. But if you don't have, for example, a January meeting, and then you've got a March, that's something else to look at. It's just your meeting dates. So if you've got a March election, but you don't have a January meeting, you might want to think ahead in order to approve them early. So it's never too early to do it. You often hear 2 months, but it's never too early. So there are also the cases where things don't go the way we want them, or they don't go exactly according to bylaws. Especially last year and the year before during the pandemic, it was hard for people to even get together. And when you can't be in person, it's hard to meet people, build a connection, be able to ask them one-on-one, hey, would you like to join in being part of PTA leadership? So there were many units that did not have nominating committees exactly according to bylaws. It is okay. We're not the PTA police coming after you. This happens. Even second district, I don't know if it was forgot or how that happened, but their nominating committee was not officially elected at the meeting. And so we still had our group together. They were identified people that were doing this recruiting. They still did the work and then presented the slate. So, there is some flexibility to these things because we understand things happen. I don't know if Michelle wants to add anything to that.
Well, I was just going to maybe say that a lot of the practices you see here are they're suggested because they will really help your PTA with transparency and inclusion and process and all that. So that's why they are there. Forming a nominating committee 2 months before an election meeting is not like an IRS requirement, or you're going to lose your nonprofit status, those kinds of things. And yeah, the PTA police are not going to come after you and take away your PTA charter if you don't do it. But they are suggestions because if you're trying to build an inclusive, representative community, it is a really good practice to have in order to make that happen. It makes sure that it's a member-driven organization, and so it's a best practice thing to do. So I just wanted to add that. And the other thing I was going to say is that I've seen in lots of schools that we've worked with in the district PTA that when they're having trouble filling officer positions, sometimes it's because this perception of like the black hole of PTA leadership of like, if I am an officer, I have to do like a million things and there's no way I have time, or like the person who came before spent 30 hours a week doing the PTA job and I don't have that kind of time. And so I think we have to be really careful about what kind of expectations we set for people when we are trying to recruit them, that there are some minimal requirements for each of those jobs in order to maintain our status as a nonprofit and to fill those basic requirements. But a lot of it is whatever you have time and interest and ability to do and what your goals are as a team. But it doesn't, we have to be careful about setting expectations for people so that it feels manageable, because there are very few people who don't have a full-time job and massive family obligations and other things. And so we have to make it a doable position. So it's something to think about as we're kind of pitching it both to the nominating committee and as they're trying to recruit people to be on a slate. So wanted to have that.
Yeah, I see some other ideas in the chat about just recruitment. And one thing that you can do, which you don't have to be in person for, is reach out to maybe your teacher representative or to an assistant vice principal or someone that you have a relationship with or that has a relationship with PTA in the educator side. And they might be able to recommend some parents that they think might be interested in being PTA leaders. Cold calling from the membership list certainly could, at least someone that shows that they have an interest in PTA. You might be able to also find some more information just to help you in your talking points on californiapta.org, on capta.org, just about, some people don't understand what it is. I know when I walked in to my oldest child's kindergarten, I did not know what PTA was. And so a lot of people then know a little bit about it and same thing, it's a fundraising organization. It's so much more than that, and really at the heart of it, it's an advocacy organization. So it gets involved with issues that relate to children and families. And so helping people to understand more about the history of PTA, which there's lots of information out there about that, might also help some people to join. I mean, I can tell you in the beginning of this school year, even, and inviting people to become members, someone said, I just don't have time to volunteer. That's very, very common. And so, people, there's all sorts of volunteer time commitments. There's things that might just be an hour a month that you could be on the PTA board with, or there's things that are almost could feel like a full-time job. And there's nothing that is required to be a full-time job. Some people put that type of hours in it because that's their passion, but there's a wide range, something for everybody. Any other questions or experiences that people want to share in their nominating committee or election experiences? Otherwise, we're about 45 minutes in and we could have 15 minutes back of your evening.
I wondered if anybody wants to just share what there's a reason that many of you or that all of you signed, registered to come tonight. And this is, so if there's, what you were hoping to understand better, or if you have specific concerns that you haven't already expressed through a question, moving into the spring, we've got a group of 10 people here who can help brainstorm with you as your PTA, community to help figure out how to address some of the concerns or challenges you're worried about.
I have a quick question, ladies. What happens if the nominating committee doesn't come to fruition? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard enough to find the officers to vote for, but what if there's no one that actually wants to volunteer to be in the committee? Then who kind of then how do you organize yourself in a sense for the election?
Well, there are cases where even if you had a nominating committee or not, there's just nobody to slate. And so you would still want to come to your election meeting, if at all possible, in March or April, according to your bylaws, and call for nominations from the floor, meaning just to put it out there, who would like to run for these offices, and be sure to message going into that meeting that this is an opportunity. We'll be calling for nominees from the floor. So if the nominating committee doesn't come together for whatever, or if you have one and it doesn't have a slate or a list, then you can still hold your election and see what happens.
Okay. Thank you.
Procedurally, that's the answer. Yeah.
I'll add to that. We have seen, ideally that if this is what happens and you get somebody in place so they can transition and start the role by the beginning of the year, usually July 1st for most of our PTAs in the city. And there have been some cases where they couldn't fill the 3 essential officers, that president, treasurer, and secretary, and then they conduct another election, or if there are enough people on the board to actually have a board, they can appoint people as soon as the school year starts. That's sort of an extreme case, but we've had to have some flexibility with some of the units during the pandemic because it's been so hard. For parents, they've had just so many stresses to deal with we've seen some schools who have had to do that, and they've either had an election right at the beginning of the school year, or they have appointed one of those missing essential officers right as school year starts, with new parents at the school or people who are ready to take on a challenge but weren't back in April.
We also, just a quick intro, since I'm Susan. I actually am a SFUSD parent alum, and so I don't have kids in the district right now. So I'm not going through the experience of like having to, here, I'll turn my video on too. While at Ruth Wauwatosa, though, we had an official nominating committee most years, but we also just, everyone on the board was always constantly just like trying to recruit and a lot of times we would, there were so many different volunteer needs there that we would sometimes create even just a small role or something for some, just to get somebody in. And then once they were comfortable and meeting with us and stuff, then they would maybe grow into one of the elected positions. So I just feel like it's an all year job, is just constantly like reaching out and talking to people. And I don't know how everyone's doing it during the pandemic. I can't imagine trying to recruit at this time. But we also put out just a form too, like, what are your, like a volunteer form. And it sometimes included, I would be willing to do this role. And it was a way to just make it accessible to everybody, so if you didn't have, if somebody didn't happen to know the person on the nominating committee, it was an easy way for them to just put in their information and say, I'm interested. It like eliminated that, I don't know how to say it, like if you don't know some of the people, and then it's an easier way to just like say, yeah, I'm interested. So I don't know if that helps too. It's like if you have an email group or anything like that, we would do that to help the nominating committee, basically.
If I could just piggyback on that, I joined today because we are having, because of the pandemic, parents are a little bit, well, I mean, everyone's scared, right? Like we only have a limited amount of hours and we're handling and doing so much more and all the stress, but we had this like lack of social opportunity and interaction. So we haven't had a chance to get to know their parents. And so it's been, even recruiting people. And we have, for us, we have 9 positions that need to be refilled. And so we're really struggling because it's 9, right? And I get it. We can continue if we only need 3, but we're really trying to do our best. And we're just like, it's crickets out there, I'm like, who, so we're just struggling. So that's why I'm here, just to kind of get some ideas. And the fact that it's good to hear that other schools are having the same problems. That makes me feel better because I thought it was just us. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
I'm glad you could be here. No, you're definitely not alone. That just also made me think about even pre-pandemic. So during pandemic, maybe if you have like, a Saturday morning coffee, meet on Zoom type thing, you see who comes, you get to know them a little bit. We used to do that pre-pandemic, like have a wine meetup, and then you'd see who was there and you kind of talk to them and kind of recruit from that. So just doing something that's not necessarily, come to this meeting to see if you would like to learn more about being on the PTA board, but just having a fun social, and then kind of just keeping in mind that this person might be great to ask them. And I don't think we talked about that too much, but just that sometimes people just need to be asked, like they really want to volunteer or just hesitant maybe, and for some reason. And so just making that one-on-one connection, however we can do it, just asking, it's worth it. Sometimes you'll get no, but sometimes you get yes.
Also asking, I tried recruiting from the advisory groups and things like that, or the SSC, and obviously they're doing a lot already. So, but they might know someone, that would like to plug in. So it's good to reach out to all those people too.
Oh, I didn't say an important thing about who can be on the nominating committee, and then slate. You can be a nominating committee member and put your own name on the slate as well. So that does not mean you can't be an officer if you were a member of the nominating committee. That happened to me. I think that reminded me when I saw, was it Rachel or someone else put in the chat, something along those lines. So.
This might not be helpful if you're just looking for your essential officers, but one thing that we did in our elementary school was encourage people to volunteer their passion, so it was what we did sort of a survey, like what are you good at? What do you like doing? And then we would try to match people's interests and passion with whatever volunteer role we needed, because then they were more likely to follow through and be excited about it because it was something they liked doing. There's some people who will always just fill whatever you need to do, I'll do it. But there are some people, especially those who have more limited time, or they're just tentative for whatever reason. If you can find a way to align their interests and passions with their volunteer role, their officer role, or whatever, that's really helpful. Sometimes people want to volunteer in a way that aligns with their professional careers, and other times they want to stay far away from it. So sometimes that can be helpful to understand, like, is there some skill or that you might have that could be useful, into that survey suggestion Suze was making.
Yeah, and to clarify, it was a more general, like, volunteer, or, what would you like to volunteer for? And then we also had all the different officers that we were looking for and chair. But we had general categories, like, do you want to be on this team? Or, do you like to do this? So it made it a little bit easier. And then we got a full list of, how people might want to plug in.
About 5 more minutes. It's been some great ideas.
It's like that awkward silence.
Thinking silence, reflection silence.
We need to have the thought bubbles.
Yeah.
I don't know where you guys are at, but we're here in San Francisco, and it's like totally like raining and stormy in this area, and it's a little bit peaceful. It's kind of nice. We're not used to this kind of weather, so.
I love the rain.
It's not. Is it raining by your house?
Where I am, Suze, because we're close to
Yeah.
each other, right?
Yeah.
It's not. I don't think it's raining here right now. It's a little
Yeah.
windy, but I'm not hearing the rain.
Yeah,
Earlier when
Richmond.
a little while ago I was.
It's definitely windy though. We have some big lights out on our olive tree outside, and they're like blowing around.
Yeah, for sure.
Michelle, since we're recording this, is this something that you would recommend we show to the board, or like our PTA board, before they ask for a nominating committee to be formed?
If they are looking for guidance, if you have, if your unit boards haven't maybe done nomination committees in the past, or there's new leadership who are trying to understand that, yes, you can absolutely share the recording of the meeting. And we'll also share Melissa's slide deck. And I'm wondering, Melissa, maybe we could also pull out those links that you put in the slides as part of the follow-up email. So in our newsletter, which actually, because we're not doing a newsletter next week because it's the holidays, maybe as soon as I get this video uploaded to our YouTube channel, we'll just send a separate email out to presidents that they can serve, and everybody who attended here. We'll send an email to you all also, so that you have all of these resources to share with whoever. But they're for anybody who thinks it'll be useful, share it with them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you put links below the YouTube in the comments?
Yeah, I mean, I could put in the video description, I could put links if you want me to.
That's super helpful. I wish the Board of Ed would do that to their recordings, like to the slides and stuff, especially when they have the YouTube recording from Zoom and it doesn't sync with the slides. It's just the person talking in the committee meetings.
Yeah.
So then you have to go back and you have to look for the slides, and then you have to match it with the.
Yeah, they do. They seem to do MVP, like minimum viable things for some of their stuff. But yes, that would be a good idea to share the link. But we'll definitely
it's just
send it in
a technical glitch. Like maybe they just don't know. I've mentioned it a couple times that
Mm.
they're not posting the right recording.
Hmm.
Or they're not recording it correctly on Zoom. Like the slides aren't showing. But anyway,
Yeah.
it's great when you can post the resources in the description for YouTube.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Usually when I share the 411 meeting recordings on YouTube, I just put a description of it. And I have put the links in the follow-up emails, but it is a good idea. I should include the links to any resources or slide decks just in the description. Yeah, good idea.
Okay, well, I hope you all feel confident in moving forward with your nominating committees. Good luck to reaching out with everyone. And don't hesitate to reach out to us at Second District if you have more questions or great ideas, or if something really worked well for you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for this. You're so appreciated, and happy holidays.
You too.
Thank you.
Right.